Welcome back to the deep dive. If you need to get smart on a complex topic and do it thoroughly, you are in the right place. Today, we're tackling a really specialized area in animal management. We're looking at how to successfully breed captive psittaciforms, parrots, macaws, cockatoos, whether that's in a big conservation program, a zoo, or even in high-end commercial aviaries.
And it's a field that's just full of challenges. We're talking about an incredibly diverse group of birds, over 400 species, and over 110 of those are facing some pretty serious extinction risks. The stakes are huge.
Wow.
And historically, for decades, a lot of the foundational knowledge for managing their reproduction was basically just educated guesswork. It was all extrapolated from completely different birds, like chickens and turkeys.
A macaw is definitely not a chicken. That's a huge leap in biological assumptions.
It is a massive leap. And that gap in specific knowledge has really been the main barrier to optimizing these captive breeding programs. We know these birds are complex, they're long-lived, and they often require years of investment before they even try to reproduce.
Right. So our sources today get into how targeted scientific data has now pinpointed the absolute best ways to manage their reproduction.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at the critical factors for reproductive success. And for this deep dive, we are zooming right in on the one management tool that is arguably the most powerful and the most manipulable in a controlled environment, which is nutritional management. So our mission here is to understand how we can use food to effectively signal to a bird's physiology that, it's time to start breeding.
Well, to use nutrition as a lever, we first have to appreciate the bird's internal machinery. Avian reproduction is, at its core, seasonal. The bird is constantly monitoring its world for cues. Scientists categorize these as exogenous factors.
For external factors.
Exactly. And these factors trigger the whole hormonal cascade required for laying eggs.
And I guess for managers, they need to know which of these factors they can actually control. The science divides them into two main types, right? Predictive and supplementary.
That's correct. The predictive factor is the big, unavoidable one, the photoperiod.
The length of the day.
Right, the increasing daylight hours that signal spring. It's the most reliable long-term cue because more light means warmer weather, plant growth, and eventually food.
But if you're running an aviary, you can't exactly change the sun. I mean, you can use artificial lights, but that can be costly and stressful. So the real management focus lands on those supplementary factors.
Exactly. The supplementary factors, things like humidity, precipitation, social interactions like courtship displays, they're the short-term cues that sort of confirm the big predictive signal is correct. And this is the critical part. Within this category, the availability and abundance of energetic foods nutrition is the lever we can pull with the most precision.
So food acts as a kind of fast-track chemical signal. If we connect this to the bird's internal biology, how do these external inputs actually translate into a hormonal response?
It's a direct conversation with the endocrine system. Specifically, it involves the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, or the HPG axis.
Okay, the HPG axis.
Think of it as the bird's master control panel for reproduction. When the bird senses favorable environmental cues, long days, rain, and crucially, an abundance of high-calorie food, those signals go straight to the hypothalamus. And that starts releasing hormones that tell the pituitary gland to get the gonads ready.
So it's a really powerful physiological lever then. You're saying that by changing the diet, we are basically skipping the slow, gradual environmental shift and sending an urgent, high-priority message straight to the bird's reproductive switchboard.
Precisely. It's a guaranteed resource message. It says, it's safe now, there is enough energy to survive the stress of egg production and successfully feed demanding chicks.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, now let's get into the specifics of what that food signal actually looks like. What did researchers observe in the wild that gave us the key to this?
The key observation was simple, but really profound. They noticed that in their natural habitats, the breeding cycle, and specifically the pairing process, often lines up very strongly with the start of the rainy season. And what does the rainy season bring? A sudden, significant offer of fatty foods and carbohydrate-rich fruits and seeds. It's a density of energy that's far greater than the maintenance diet they live on during the dry season. The bird sees the fat, and its brain just says, time to reproduce.
So the direct application in captivity isn't just about giving them more food, but increasing the caloric quality.
That's the core finding. To mimic that natural supplementary signal, the diet for the breeding season has to involve a purposeful, structured increment, mainly of fats and carbohydrates. That's compared to the diet they get during the non-breeding maintenance period. This caloric bump is the physiological trigger.
This is where it gets really interesting because we're not just talking about the what, but the when. You can't just dump a bunch of extra sunflower seeds in the bowl on the first day of spring and expect immediate results. So how long is the lag time between that dietary signal and the output?
Timing is absolutely critical, and it's often counterintuitive for managers, which is why the sources really stress this point. They explain that this special high-energy feeding regimen has to be adjusted months in advance of when you actually want them to lay.
Give us the specific example from the source material. This is where the surprise is.
Okay, let's take a species that naturally reproduces in the spring, say March or April. Logically, a manager might think they should start that high-energy diet in, what, February?
Yeah, that seems right.
But the sources mandate an acceleration. For that same spring-breeding bird, the offer of high-energy diets should actually start as early as July or August of the previous calendar year.
July or August, that feels like the middle of summer, the furthest thing from a breeding signal. Why so far in advance?
Because it takes time for the bird to build up the necessary body condition, to create the fat reserves needed to support not just laying, but the intense physiological demands of yolk formation and incubation. You need those months of gradual caloric density and nutrient storage before the bird's internal systems even begin to ramp up the HPG axis for reproduction.
So you're preparing the body for months, so it's ready the instant the other cues, like light, kick in.
Exactly. By starting in late summer, you're making sure the bird hits peak condition and hormonal readiness precisely when the photoperiod begins its predictive signal in the winter or spring. Without that long pre-breeding ramp-up, the bird simply won't have the metabolic resources to commit to laying a full clutch of viable eggs.
Okay, but before we get into the daily menu, we have to talk about the health of the bird itself. This rich, energy-dense diet is necessary. But if the pair is already unhealthy, we're just making things worse.
This is a really important point about efficacy. The sources are clear. Birds showing signs of obesity should be excluded from the breeding program, at least temporarily. If a bird is already overweight, its system is stressed. Adding rich food won't signal abundance, it'll signal danger. Managers have to adjust the bird's body score and weight before the breeding season even begins. Only healthy individuals can handle this kind of high-performance diet.
Okay, so we've selected our healthy pairs. We know to boost fats and carbs, and we know to start way back in July or August for a spring clutch. Let's get practical. What does the day-to-day feeding regimen look like? Is it just one big bowl of energy mix?
No, not at all. The recommendation is for a much more structured two-part day. This maximizes both nutrition and the psychological well-being of the birds. The morning feeding should start with an extruded, balanced feed that's appropriate for that specific species. This makes sure they get a consistent, complete baseline of all the known vitamins and minerals.
And the afternoon, that's where we add that supplementary signal, right?
Yeah, precisely. The afternoon is for the fresh supplementation. Fruits, vegetables, and other specialized energy-dense items that represent that natural abundance. But here's the dual benefit that managers sometimes miss. This varied afternoon offering serves as crucial environmental enrichment.
Ah, so it's not just nutritional, it's psychological.
Exactly. By giving them varied foods later in the day, you break the monotonous predictability of a captive environment. This variability lets the birds engage in their natural foraging behaviors, what we call their ethogram, which is inherently linked to reproductive success. A bird that is behaviorally enriched and stimulated is just far more likely to pair up and breed than a bored, stressed individual.
That connection between mental health and reproductive output is key. Now, moving from food to hydration, the sources also make a very specific point about water quality, which can often get overlooked when the focus is all on the pellet formulation.
Water is absolutely critical for high metabolic processes, especially egg laying. It has to be provided freely, and it must be clean and consistently tested. The critical step they recommend is this. The water source should be analyzed before the start of the reproductive season.
And what are they specifically looking for in that analysis?
They specify checking its physical characteristics, but more importantly, actively screening for the presence of common pathogens. They specifically call out Giardia.
Giardia.
Yes. This parasite causes significant gastrointestinal distress, it reduces nutrient absorption, and can dramatically undermine the effectiveness of that expensive high-performance diet we just implemented. It just highlights how sanitary conditions and nutritional input have to be managed as one holistic system.
That makes a lot of sense. You can't run an engine on high-octane fuel if the fuel lines are clogged. So now we have the pair reproducing, the chicks hatch, and the parents are feeding them. How long do we keep this high-energy diet going?
Well, the reproductive diet has to be maintained while the parents are actively feeding the chicks in the nest. They aren't just eating for themselves. They're processing those nutrients into crop milk or regurgitated food for their offspring. That demands continuous peak caloric intake. The parent birds are essentially working double shifts.
And if we keep them on that rich diet forever, we'll get back to the obesity and health problems we talked about, or even stimulate endless, exhausting laying. So when do you signal that the season is over?
The transition back is just as important as the ramp up. As the chicks grow and become more independent, the diet has to be progressively returned to the maintenance formulation. This gradual reduction in caloric density and fat content actively serves to signal the end of the breeding season to the female. It tells her body that the period of natural abundance is over, and it's time to rest and rebuild.
It's a beautifully choreographed nutritional schedule. Now, let's pivot to the extreme end of management, because this high-performance diet is what allows some facilities to use aggressive breeding techniques, specifically something called double clutching, to really maximize production.
Right, double clutching is a strategy designed to capitalize on the fact that many psittacines are continuous layers. It involves removing the first set of eggs from the nest, usually for artificial incubation, which then stimulates the female to replace them. She just keeps laying.
And the productivity gains are just staggering. The sources note that with this technique and the right nutritional support, some of these birds can lay up to 40 eggs per season.
40 eggs. That's an incredible metabolic output. This is where the whole nutritional discussion becomes absolutely essential. A bird subjected to that kind of aggressive schedule is functionally a production athlete. It must be continuously monitored and receive a management plan that explicitly supports this high-performance egg production.
40 eggs is a significant physical and metabolic toll. What are the specific nutritional demands in that scenario, beyond just boosting fats and carbs?
The primary demand is for readily available minerals, especially calcium. Eggshell formation is hugely calcium intensive. If the diet isn't perfect, a bird pushed to lay 40 eggs will quickly deplete its own bone reserves, which leads to really serious health issues. So the management plan demands an ideal sanitary and nutritional condition at the same time. You just can't push that kind of output if you're cutting corners.
And you mentioned sanitary management supports this. The source detailed some specific monitoring strategies.
Yes, they really emphasize preventative health. This includes regular monitoring for pathology, and specifically using annual coproparasitological exams. A useful detail for managers is that the exam can be done on a pooled sample for the breeding couple, and based on those findings, deworming should be performed annually before the season begins. It's all preventative maintenance to make sure the gut can actually process and use that expensive high-performance diet.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a lot of detail, but what's the fundamental takeaway here?
I think the main takeaway is that reproductive success in captive psittacines is fundamentally about control and precision. We've established that managing the environment is key, but the most precise, science-backed way to deliver that go signal to the bird is through meticulously timed dietary change, incrementing fats and carbohydrates to mimic that natural abundance.
It certainly reinforces the reality that for these incredibly diverse and often threatened species, the technical and scientific information has to be implemented precisely. Relying on these fundamental, focused measures like knowing exactly when to start the diet and how to maintain water quality is what truly optimizes a productive system.
And this focused approach is so vital because, for many facilities, scientific knowledge base is still kind of playing catch-up with the actual needs of managing such valuable and complicated creatures.
And let's leave you with a final thought to mull over. We often think of parrots as being strictly monogamous, pair bonding for life. However, the sources note that in complex group captive settings, some species can actually exhibit polygamous behavior or even switch partners, especially after the death of one bird. So given that some really valuable species like macaws might take 3 to 5 years before they even produce their first successful clutch, which represents a massive long-term investment, how much might the manager's consistent, targeted high-performance nutritional support, which guarantees high-value resources year after year? How much might that influence the perceived stability of those pair bonds? Does nutritional security act as a social binder, justifying that long wait and maintaining the stability of a partnership that is so economically and ecologically valuable?
That's a fascinating convergence of resource management and behavioral commitment.
Indeed. We appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the nutritional levers of Psittacine breeding. We'll see you next time.